message this week. So glad that you've decided to join us. On the day I prepared today's message, I heard from a friend of mine who shared with me some news that was a little hard to hear. He had just heard from the doctors, and his toddler grandson had been diagnosed as blind. And as I listened to him tell me this story, there was kind of a mix of sadness and resolve in his voice. There was sadness because it was the news he did not want to hear. There was resolve in his voice because he said, you know, we're going to find a way to beat this. He's still young. We're going to work with the doctors. We're going to find a way to beat this. Well, in today's gospel lesson from Mark, we meet a man named Bartimaeus, himself a blind man who is determined to find healing. He has confronted the fact that he is blind, but he is determined to find healing. Today's reading may be as much a mirror for you and me as it is a record of historical people and events. But before we kind of move on to turn the mirror on ourselves a little bit today, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes pointing out some interesting things about this passage. One of the things that's interesting is that the healing of Bartimaeus is the last recorded act of healing in Mark's gospel. The majority of those receiving healing in the New Testament are not mentioned by name, but another interesting thing is that the Mark, who wrote this gospel account, takes the time to actually mention the name of Bartimaeus. And his name is also interesting because it has a very definite and precise translation, which isn't the case for most names. Most names have a little broader translation, but the name of Bartimaeus has a very specific translation, and it's translated as son of Timaeus, which means honorable man. So son of honorable man is the literal translation of the name. Another remarkable thing about this beggar was his faith statement. So when Jesus comes by and Bartimaeus, the blind beggar, when he looks in the direction of Jesus and he calls out to him, he repeatedly, the scripture says, called him son of David, which was messianic in nature. Now remember where this is. Jesus hasn't been crucified yet. He hasn't been lifted up. People have not begun to widely recognize him as Messiah. They're calling him teacher and things like that. But he's repeatedly calling him son of David. And so, in other words, he starts off here by acknowledging who Jesus really is. That's another reason that this story is so significant. So the question for you and for me always is, where do we find ourselves in this story? There's the eager, perhaps overly eager blind beggar who keeps kind of pushing himself to the forefront of this event here, trying to get the attention of Jesus. We also, if you read the scripture, and if you didn't, go back and read it so you can kind of understand the different actors here. But we also have a skeptical crowd here that's operating, and the crowd at first is trying to control this beggar. They're trying to manage the beggar, if you will, because someone very important, Jesus, is coming through. They're trying to kind of push the beggar off to the margins a little bit to quiet him down and manage him. And then the interesting thing is the crowd kind of turns a little bit. And just as soon as it becomes obvious that Jesus is interested in the beggar, well, then the crowd kind of tries to control access to the beggar. All of a sudden, they're interested in him in a totally different way. And then, of course, we have Jesus in the story. Jesus, the model of compassion, who hears the beggar's cries, who heals his blindness, and then calls on him to follow. So, we take all that, we turn the mirror on ourselves, and we kind of ask ourselves, well, who are we in the story? Are we the compassionate one? Are we the one trying to kind of manage the situation? Are we the one in need, down on the ground perhaps, trying to raise our hand and get attention? Where are we today in the story? There's also a second question that we have to ask ourselves, and it's a hard question, really, and it's the question of who are the blind beggars in our midst today? Who is it that we try to silence or keep out of public view? And are we sometimes trying to get credit for helping people when we're really in the way, like this crowd was here today? And finally, what does it take to get us out of the way? So three things. Who are the blind beggars in our midst? Who are the people that we kind of secretly wish weren't there, that we kind of just try to manage and push out of the way? Who are the people that we try to get credit for helping? That maybe our motivations for helping aren't right at all, but maybe we're trying to help them in a way that somehow boosts our position with other people. And finally, what does it take to get us out of the way? These are hard questions. They're especially hard for the church. I've heard too many stories in my life of people showing up at church and feeling like they were being marginalized because maybe they didn't dress the right way, or they weren't the right type of person for that church, or they didn't know what to do at a certain time, or they didn't quite fit in some particular way. But it's in our attempts to try to create a perfect picture that we sometimes block the very people that Jesus is trying to reach out to. We're going to look at this in a little bit more detail in part 2.